how to keep an open line of communications with your employees. So our speaker today is Sylvain Mansotte. Sylvain is the founder and CEO of Whispli, with offices in Boston and in Australia. I'm Ludivine Wolksik, the executive director of FACNI, the leading organization connecting French and American business leaders in New England. We also support French companies to set up and develop their business in the Boston area and organize learning expeditions for delegations to discover the incredible innovation hub that Boston is. Before we start, some housekeeping items. So this event is recorded, and a replay will be available on FACNI's social media, YouTube channel, and website. The conversation with Sylvain is going to be around 30 minutes long with a brief presentation. We will then have a Q&A. And if you'd like to send your questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your window. I will also open it up live for questions at that time. Every participant is mute. And if we get disconnected at one point, please click the link again that we sent to you earlier. So let me introduce our speaker, Sylvain Mansotte. So Sylvain is founder and CEO of Whispli. He has more than 20 years of experience in supply chain, in procurement, compliance, risk management, and he had an experience as a whistleblower. So Sylvain, tell us more about yourself, about your personal story.
Thank you for having me on this webinar. Yes, so I happen to be a whistleblower. I uncovered a fraud that was just over $20.7 million in Australia, where I spent 13 years of my life before coming to Boston, and so it was kind of I guess a first for me to have to speak up about something that I thought couldn't happen in a company, that someone would steal that much money over 12 years. And because I was new and I was on probation, I actually thought that I must be wrong and must not be looking at the numbers in the right way. But after a few hours of digging, I felt that feeling to speak up, and I found the process very difficult, I guess, for people to feel safe and to be empowered to engage in a conversation with the organization and to actually say, hey, listen, I think this is wrong. Can you please double check? So that's how I became I guess intrigued in the world of whistleblowing and investigation. So that led me to the second role that I had for that very same organization, which was to become a pseudo investigator / internal auditor, and then was on the other side of the fence to be the recipient of whistleblower disclosures, and realized that very few people were speaking up, and the consequences of that was actually that the good people were more and more disconnected with the organization because they could see wrongdoing happening but didn't have the strength to actually speak up. So that's what led me to build Whispli, and at Whispli we've been operating for nearly 6 years now. So we can see a few logos of our clients from around the world, but we provide a platform that enables people to engage in a secure, anonymous, two-way conversation with the organization to report unethical practices, wrongdoing or misconduct, but a lot more also around employee well-being and employee engagement. And if I go into how we differentiate from others in the market, is just because again, I realized probably 3 years after I blew the whistle that nobody wakes up on a Monday morning thinking that they're going to blow the whistle because it's super exciting. It doesn't happen that way. So today's systems that are in place are poorly used, only because you're not born to be a whistleblower. In our culture, I think the French culture mostly, not so much the American culture, but we don't really dub in onto our mates or our friends or our colleagues. It's not something that we tend to do. We could be seen as snitches and kind of a villain, so it's not something that we do. But what I've realized over the years was that actually whistleblowing was what we called a trusted conversation. It's a difficult and courageous conversation that people want to have, and that doesn't have to be about fraud and corruption. There's plenty of conversation that we want to have in an organization that we actually don't have, and that could be around the fact that you may work 15 hours a day and you can't get the work done. And I guess there's a lot of that happening in all sorts of companies, including in biotech, and there's plenty of that in Boston. But where people actually don't tend to engage with their leaders, with their managers, because they fear that they might be seen as the weak employee in the team, or someone that can't do his job, and so people tend not to speak up, and could that could lead to a burnout, or someone having to leave the organization, all of that for the wrong reason. So that could be a trusted conversation. Another one could be around what's going on with the actual crisis, where people work from home and feel disconnected to the workplace. They're worried about whether they're going to keep their job. They're worried about working with their partner 24/7 and the kids running around, and that leads to some type of conversation that employees also want to have. And so the idea of Whispli is to really enable that full spectrum of conversations, from safety to environment to diversity and inclusion to, yes, fraud and corruption sometimes. But the idea is, how can you build that trust using technology, so people have the freedom to connect with the organization using a tool that they trust. And so what that leads us to is the idea of what's happening out there in the whistleblowing world. Is you've got the top of the icebergs, where you want to tick the compliance box because you need to have a tool in place because you're a large company. And you do what we call the classic whistleblowing, and once in a blue moon you get a report that comes in. But what we do is a lot more meaningful, in the sense that by enabling those trusted conversations on the full spectrum, you now have employees that are more engaged. You have people that talk to the company and provide feedback, and increase retention, increase productivity and well-being overall. So that's what we've discovered by building that platform. But it all started with the idea of Whispli would be a whistleblowing platform. And the way that translates into our product is just the ability for someone to scan a QR code that the company would have created. Behind that QR code, the employee would open what we call their safe inbox, and from that safe inbox, they start anonymous communications. So here on the screen, it's just an example, but the employee works for the Acme company. He's got you want to chat about the working from home policy, and the second screen is that conversation with an HR leader from that Acme company. And as you can see, the employee appears as being an orange giraffe, which is the avatar that the system gives to the employee for each a new conversation that they start. And the third screen on the right-hand side, you can see that the employee also started another conversation as the blue penguin. And all of those conversations are independent by default. So that means that on one conversation, I may well be willing to give away my name at some point because it talks about probably bullying or sexual harassment. And at some point, I would have to give away my name if I feel comfortable to do so. And then the company would know who I am behind that avatar, but the company wouldn't know who I am behind the other avatars. So that's kind of what the platform allows employees to do. And as per the organization, they've got that ability to manage the disclosure from what we call a case management solution, and help their employees.
Okay. And so there is no way for the companies, to track, from which cell phone number, the blue penguin, send the message. It's completely anonymous.
Correct. It's completely anonymous. And by the way, I showed you the mobile version with the app. Employees, when they create their safe inbox, they don't use their personal contact details. Of course, they make up the username, so they could be Tintin123, and they make up the password. They can access that from any web browser. They don't have to use their personal device. I guess the app is just a lot more convenient in today's world. because employees can receive notifications, so they can really have a two-way chat. Well, if they use a web browser, they would have to connect and log back in every now and then to see if there's a response from the company. So we found that, and we don't track IP addresses, we don't track anything within the company, within Whispli. We don't access data either. So that's that's heavily secured. All the data is encrypted, whether it's in transit or at rest. So that makes the tool very safe to use.
Okay, and so which department of the company is chatting? Is it HR? Is it which usually what is the go-to person?
So it depends on the organization. It could be, of course, HR, usually in large organization when you've got HR that have been trained to deal with this type of disclosures. Sometimes because the conversation could be around, a safety concern or a concern around, someone may have stolen some, gel sanitizers or mask or whatever, and then it might be triaged to internal audit. Or it could be if it's an HR topic and the company doesn't have the resource internally to deal or the skill set to deal with those type of matters internally, they may outsource to an employee assistance program organization, such as third party. The same comes to the issues around fraud or corruption, for instance. If the company doesn't have the resource internally, those reports could be triaged to an external third party that does operate in the forensic space. But the idea is, for me as an employee, I only have one entry point, which could be the Whispli platform, from which I start my conversations, and then the system will triage those reports automatically, depending on what I want to talk about. And so the ability to do that ensures that only the relevant case managers will actually review the report that belong to, I guess, their skill sets, and also it fast tracks the process of triaging, because the system does that on behalf of the employee. Now, another way of looking at it, and that's my personal preference as a whistleblower, is we should give the choice to the informant, to the employee. So it could be a list of departments, a list of functions, a list of people for smaller companies, and the employee could select, who they want to interact with within the organization. That's usually, I guess, that provides the best outcome, because you give the choice to the employee to communicate with who they believe is the person they can trust, or who is the person that they believe can help them in that matter.
Okay. Thank you, Sylvain.
And so I don't know if you do you want to go through maybe you've got a few questions that you want to ask me, and I can either give you my view on going back to our topic on how to keep an open line of communication with your employees.
Yes, in fact, so I had a question about at this time, at the COVID time. So how can a company take the pulse of its workforce, make sure that they feel safe? Because companies at this time, they are reopening their offices. They make sure, that they have the right protocols in place, so that when the employees are back in the office, they feel they feel safe, healthy. But how can you make sure that they feel safe?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I guess I can relate to that, having a team of 25 people based in Australia, in the US, and in France, where we were used to kind of work remotely, but always pockets of employees in certain cities. Now we're definitely working from home. We're only thinking about going back, as we speak now. But it's definitely been a change in the way we interact with each other. And I think what really worked, for Whispli, and does work elsewhere, is always to over communicate. That's really the key when there's a crisis or a disruption or something that's we can't really grasp ourselves, and we need some guidance from our leaders. So we do this by having frequent Zoom meetings. We do this by having a weekly email that I draft every Sunday night and send to the entire team to give them an update on what happened last week and what's coming up this week, and things that may have come up on the horizon. So it's all about them not having to wonder, what's happening within the business, whether there's going to be a company tomorrow, whether they're going to have a job or not tomorrow. And that's really important to communicate that way. We do that also through having frequent happiness surveys. And when we say happiness surveys, it's, it could be under the form of, give us a rating between 1 to 10. How happy are you this week? And someone might say, I've got a 7. And you might think, oh, it's good enough if you've got a 7. But the idea is, how can you get you to a 10? Or like, what's missing so I can get you to a 10? So it's only, never rest on the happy side of things. Is always try to dig and understand what's not going so well that they're not yet at 10. So it's really important to have those conversations. And employee feedback surveys, we actually just about to create one because we are thinking of going back to the office. We know that working remotely has been good in a way for a lot of our employees, even though I think they've got an overdose of working from home, but they do like, the idea of having that work-life balance between the office and the workplace. So again, the idea is not to make assumptions about what we think they want, but to actually ask them, what do you want to do tomorrow when we go back to that new normal? What does that new normal looks like for Whispli? And it's about involving them into, I guess, the future of Whispli as a workplace. We may end up having a balance of working 2 days or 3 days from an office and 2 days or 3 days from home or from the beach or from wherever they want. That's kind of the working from anywhere policy now, which is quite appealing as well to some, to be honest. But what was good is that during that period, we didn't really see a decrease in productivity. However, things that we could be worried about is that people might actually be working too much because they work in kind of piecemeal, time slots. For some, they might be single, and the only thing they have to do, being at home on lockdown, is actually work, and that could lead to some other type of issues. So it's how you manage that right balance and make sure you keep the pulse. A lot of Zoom gathering, even though some people do tend to have an overdose of those Zoom meetings, I think we keep them kind of really casual, short as well. It could be 15 or 30 minutes. To work with our time zone, we've got 2 of them a week to make sure that everybody's got a chance to join. And then celebration, we've got, we use technology, like Slack to communicate internally. And I looked at it yesterday. We've got 102 channels on Slack, and some of them are about fun. So it's, it could be a random fun. It could be the wins at the company. It could be, a new opportunity or things that are going to boost the morale of our employees as well, to make sure that we can cheer them up as well. So there's a lot of things that, companies can do. But again, when it comes to how a company can take the pulse of its workforce, technology mostly these days is really important. So what I showed you about that mobile app is definitely very helpful in terms of giving the opportunity for those employees to connect with their HR leaders or manager in their own time. So they don't have to wait the Zoom meetings. They don't have to wait the one-on-one meeting. They can do it, from their own on their own time, using the technology that they like. And again, they don't have to do it by disclosing their identity. So even though at Whispli we've got a small team, we definitely do our happiness surveys and surveys using our own platform. But when it comes to a larger corporate organization, where you don't know what's happening with your thousands or hundreds of employees when they work from home, to give them the opportunity to use technology and connect with the organization when they need it is the best way to address that. Because again, they might not feel comfortable to do it openly on a Zoom. They might not feel comfortable to do it through email or just over the phone. So it's a good avenue to actually remove what we call the fear and shame that people have when they want to engage in a trusted conversation, but they usually feel bad about speaking up because they assume that the problem is coming from themselves. They've got kids, or they've got a partner that's kind of a nuisance sometime, or they're overwhelmed by the fact that they're working from home, and so they don't want to again appear as being the weak employee in the team. And so having the ability to take away the fear and the shame, meaning making people anonymous, at least in the first instance, is the best way to put the employee and the employer on a level playing field, to make sure they've got that open and trusted conversation.
Yeah. And so what are the questions or the information that employees are most asking at this time?
So The first one is, and we've seen that with a lot of companies laying off people, the furlough, having companies to stood down employees. I think it's about job security in the future of the company. Like, will my business still be there tomorrow? And I think a lot of people would relate to the travel industry or education. That was a complete shutdown. A lot of the restaurants as well had to shut down. Very few could do, takeaway food, take-home food. And so it's all about, will I keep my job with what's going on? Whether you look at, the US or France or the countries, we've all been impacted, and we don't know when this is going to stop. So it's all about, job security, and will the business still be there? The other thing that comes up really quickly after that is my own health. Like, as an employee, I fear that if I have to go back to work for whatever reason, because I work in the health sector, or maybe the food industry, or the delivery, the supply chain, and I need to go to work, I fear that I may catch the virus and bring it home. And that's another really a key element that we need to address. The same applies to people working from home. They feel that if they do catch the virus, what's going to happen to themselves and their family? And what if my family that doesn't live under my roof, that could be actually in France or somewhere else, is sick? I can't go and see them most likely. So all of that anxiety and stress is really coming back into those surveys. The other one that comes up, and for us it came up after probably 4 to 6 weeks, was when will we have the next opportunity to see each other? Because I guess at the beginning it was kind of fun to see each other on Zoom, but then the physical contact and going to the office and interacting with our colleagues really came back as saying, like, we want to do it. But that led to another question is, okay, if we can now go back to work, we may have social distancing rules in the office, but what's gonna happen, when I go to work and take public transport, for instance? People are, have that fear that from home to the office, there'll be there's something that could happen. So it's thinking broadly about, yes, the office space, but also the commute from employees into the office.
Okay. And so do you think companies of all sizes, should offer this type of solution? Because I imagine, some listeners must think, okay, this is for a very large corporation. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a startup, or I have a small company. This is not for our culture, our community. What would you say?
So I guess I'll take definitely for the big ones, because again, it's you've got leaders, you've got managers, and they need to reach out to their teams. So that makes a ton of sense for them to actually use that type of technology, and that's really what came out of the first surveys that we did as well. They miss that connection with their people. They don't know if they're doing okay or not, and they don't know how they can help. And so having that open line communication definitely helps. Now, for smaller organization, I'm an entrepreneur. I only have a team of 25 people, and even though I could think that everything is great, and if people want to reach out to me, they can, because we're a small team and we know each other, and there's a great culture. I know for a fact that people, do use technology to actually tell us things that we didn't know before. So even in a small organization, things can happen, and it doesn't have to be around further corruption. It could be around, cyberbullying or cyber stalking that does exist in corporate. And we believe that because now we work from home, we're going to be safe from, bullying or harassment from the workplace. No, it still can happen online, and it's sometimes even worse. So those things do happen. But in our instance, for instance, what we did, the first survey we did, we actually didn't use our technology. We used, I think it was a Google form. And I was so frustrated because our employees started to give us some feedback, and we couldn't actually understand what they were telling us. We didn't know if it was black or white, and we were all making interpretation about what they were telling us. And we had no way to actually engaging with them and going back to them, because it was anonymous and it was a one-way street. And so from that first survey, we definitely, said that we would walk the talk and eat our own dog food by, using Whispli ourselves. And ever since, we've been able to communicate with them on a regular basis. They can actually chat with us without waiting for a survey to be launched, and that works really, really well. So there's no real I guess, company size, and I think any entrepreneur should understand that when it's about those difficult conversations, people will most likely don't engage in an open conversation because, again, they don't know what the reaction from the company is going to be like. And sometimes they blame themselves for not being able to deal with the issue or deal with the situation, and they don't want to bring that into the workplace. And you know what? I've done one-on-ones with my employees, and it was not about work. It was all about themselves and their families. And you discover so much about, you know, the fact that they may have someone stranded over in another country from their family that they don't know if they're going to be able to travel back home. From, you know, the other one that's they know someone in the family is subject to some type of, you know, bullying or domestic violence. So things that are quite serious that you never pick up when you're in the workplace. So having that opportunity these days to engage in those deeper conversations applies to smaller business as it applies to larger businesses.
Thank you, Sylvain. And so you mentioned that you have teams in the United States, in Australia, in Europe, and so do you see any difference between the way you know, employees are using you know, trusted conversations?
So I think that the main difference is more the perception from the organizations, not so much the employees or the individuals themselves. And again, it all relates to our culture. Here in the US, they've used the traditional hotlines like the 1-800 number for, you know, decades, and it's kind of part of their DNA. If you see something, just pick up the phone and report it. So that's kind of been embedded into that DNA. In France, I guess history has shown that again, as I was saying earlier, it's not necessarily being perceived as a positive things to speak up and to report misconduct or wrongdoing. But what we've seen as you use the technology, that doesn't apply, because again, the technology takes the identity of the individuals away, and it's just, you know, people then relate to more to the code of conduct of their company, which is kind of the framework that they can operate into. That code of conduct usually tell them what they can do and what they can't do, and that if they see something that is unethical or not aligned to the code of conduct, they should report it. So if you give them the tool that is next to that code of conduct, that will enable them to remove themselves from the equation in saying, hey, I suspect this is wrong, can you please check? And I don't have to put my name on it. Then all employees or most employees are likely to actually do this. If you ask them to put a name on a report, most of them will never actually report it, because again, of that perception of you know, being seen as a snitch or a villain in the organization. So I guess there's this type of differences between the US and France are definitely there. But as soon as you give a tool that takes away the identity, then whether you're in Australia, the US, or Mexico or France, doesn't matter. People will use the technology, because now they remove themselves, you know, from the equation, and they just follow the code of conduct, and you know, whether or not they should report that unethical behavior.
Okay. Okay, and I see it's 2:30 already, so I'd like to open the floor to our attendees for their questions. So we have questions from Karin Knop, and Karin, I invite you to open your mic and ask your question. If you can say a few words about yourself, about your profile.
Sure. Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm actually in my basement, so I'm not going to turn on my video because it's too hot in the house. But this was a great, I think, conversation around how we talk with employees are key at this moment. I'm interested in mental health at work, and I was wondering if you share with the employees how many queries are posted on Whispli and in what category. And,
so, yep.
And then the related question is, you know, in mental health, we always have the problem that if a lot of people come forward with issues, is it a good sign? Does it mean that people feel safe coming forward and feel that the managers care enough to be engaged? Or is it a bad sign? Is it a sign of a corporate culture that is actually toxic? How do you calibrate what is a good and bad sign in terms of how much people use your service?
Yep. So I guess we don't access the data of our clients. However, as I said earlier, communication is key. So, and it has to be top down. So as an organization, if you believe in ethics, then you have to walk the talk. And it means every time you get a report, it needs to be investigated. You need to provide feedback, continuous feedback to the employee about what's happening in that process. And when it's finished, The tool does provide them with some analytics about, the type of reports, how long it took them to be, handled and everything. And it's up to the companies to actually publish that. But you're right, if they do publish the information, and you don't have to give the details, of course, but it could be, hey, in that biotech company, whatever, we had 2 cases of sexual harassment and 5 cases of bullying, and maybe 3 cases of fraud, and give some kind of high-level information about those cases and what decisions were made or conclusions were taken. So employees know that when they're going to report something, the company is going to take it seriously and is going to do their job. Now, that goes without saying, but of course, there shouldn't be any retaliation. And that should be clear in the code of conduct and whistleblowing policy. People are here, the people that are called whistleblowers, or the good people that do speak up and engage in those trusted conversations, they're here for the good of the company. So that's the basis of who is an employee. They're here to help the company to grow, and so we should take their disclosures or conversations very seriously. And it's important to keep that feedback or continuous communication with them, giving them ideas on why it's taking so long to investigate maybe. But when it's finished, we should give them what we can, of course, about the conclusion that was drafted by the organization, by the case managers, and then broadly to the organization. Definitely, usually the larger companies do have those type of reports where they publish key numbers, key figures around whether it's mental health, whether it's diversity and inclusion, whether it's fraud and corruption, whether it's safety, environment. They've got those KPIs, they've got those metrics, and they publish that. But that does apply to all companies, because the more you do it, the more it will make employees comfortable to speak up, which leads to your second question, Karen, which is about, is it a good sign when people do speak up too much? They never speak up too much. They never engage in too many conversations. And again, it's all about creating that trust and making sure that employees, when they've got a concern, an issue, when they want to provide feedback, whether positive or negative, they know they can do it safely and securely. They know they can disclose their identity if they want to, or they can remain anonymous. And so definitely companies should welcome more of those. And again, I can take one simple example, and it relates to my own experience as a whistleblower. It was 12 years before actually I got that job, and 2 months in, I uncovered the fraud. But there was at least 50 to 100 people that saw exactly what I saw, and they said nothing. And so the cost of that fraud, which was $20.7 million, actually ballooned to over $23 million, because we had to fix the bloody problem. And to do that, we brought in the big guns with the really high caliber professional services firm. We stopped all the work we're doing internally to try to control the situation. And so the cost of waiting and doing nothing and not enabling your people to speak up is actually a lot greater the more you wait and the more the risk increase for the organization. The same applies to people being frustrated or people being under pressure and close to the burnout. If they do a burnout, you're not going to see them for months, and they might leave the company. So you've lost one of your best assets. Well, you should have invested in that assets and communicated with them on a regular basis when they wanted to engage with the company. So I think, again, the perception that companies need to have is to embrace those trusted conversations, because this is what's going to make your business a great business. So I hope that this is answering your question, Karen, but I'm keen to hear what you have to say, because I know that you're an expert in that field too.
Yes, thank you. We'll follow up and let other people have a chance. Thank you so much. Great, great presentation.
Thank you.
So another question is about, so what is the trend that you see, Sylvain, because you explained, anonymity is really key. And then, employees have, they can make their choice if they want to stay anonymous or if they want to disclose their identity and have, open conversations. What is the trend? People prefer to stay anonymous, or do they prefer to have direct conversations and speak openly?
That's a good question. And the answer is, for the most part, they prefer to start by being anonymous, because that allows to build the trust with the other side, whether it's one case manager or multiple. So it's all about understanding how they look at my problem, or what I give them, whether it's fraud, whether it's bullying, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's being overwhelmed at work, whether it's a safety concern. They want to see how the company sees their own problem, because they might have a different approach to it. They might say, hey, listen, this is how we do business. It's okay. And then, I will never provide my identity. So it's all about building the trust, And for the company, it's about showing empathy. So again, if you take very serious matters like sexual harassment, for instance, what's happening today is, if you take, the Bill Cosby, the Weinstein case, whoever, they always takes, a long, long time. It could be decades before, someone comes up and speaks up. If you take the case of Weinstein, it was, I believe, 87 victims. A lot of people would say, oh, you know what, most of them were fake. Okay, remove 90% of those victims. There's still nine too many victims that were subject to, that monster. How can you, what can you implement to make sure that those victims actually speak up early? Because they had access to a hotline, they had access to a fax, they had access to a PO box, they had access to the magnificent open door policy that all companies have, but nobody had the courage to actually overcome the fear and the shame that they had of speaking up. But once you got one victim that does speak up, then all of the other victims will follow suit. And that's really what happened in those instances, where people feel empowered by others when they do speak up. So if you can again take the fear and shame away, then those victims come up early, and you can protect other employees. You can stop those perpetrators from doing what they're doing. And so again, the ability to build the trust, show empathy as a company, to give them option in saying, hey, listen, you can come and talk to those individuals in HR. You can go and see that doctor, will foot the bill, no question asked. You can go and see that employee assistance program, but give them options. Now, some companies will come and say, hey, Sylvain, you can imagine if we got accusation of sexual harassment, that's really something we want to take seriously, but we can't go and accuse one of our employees of committing a crime while we've got an anonymous, victim that we don't know if it's real or not. And again, the idea here is build trust, show empathy. The victim would have to disclose their identity if you want to be able to go and interview that so-called perpetrator. But what could happen as well is the system could well protect the company, because if the victim doesn't want or doesn't feel comfortable to give away their name, then the company is highly likely going to do nothing. They might keep an eye on that, on that employee to make sure that there's nothing wrong with him or with her, but they won't go and accuse him of wrongdoing. And 6 months later, that victim could well sue the company, saying, "Hey, you've done nothing. That manager is still around, and I told you that he did X, Y, Z." The company can then go back in the audit trail and say, "Yes, but we've given you all of the options, and you were not comfortable to take any of those, and we wouldn't accuse employees based on an anonymous report." So again, anonymity plays for both sides as well, but for employees is definitely key. And the last thing I'll say is most people are the Pareto rules of the 80-20. It doesn't apply to whistleblowing. In whistleblowing, it's the 90-10 rule, where if you do allow for anonymity, then you've got more chances, 9 out of 10, for people to speak up. If you don't allow for anonymity, then you can expect only 10% of individuals to actually speak up. So it does make a huge difference to allow anonymity.
Okay. Thank you. And I see our time is running out. So Sylvain, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. So you are a FACNI member. You are reachable at sylvain@whispli.com. So I hope to see you in person very soon. So this is one of our last webinars before the summer break. But just know that on Tuesday at 1 p.m. we'll have a chat with Adeline Simoneau, who is an immigration lawyer, and she will give us an update about the new executive order of June 22nd regarding the new visa ban in the United States. So if you have questions about this topic, don't hesitate to share your questions with us, and we hope to see you on Tuesday. Thank you, Sylvain.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm meant to actually show you some slides, but I'm struggling to navigate around, so I'm hoping you can see the last one now. Cool. So that's the upcoming webinar that you're talking about, Ludivine.
Yeah, so next Tuesday at 1 p.m. and registration is open on our website and in our newsletter.
Great. And just so in case you missed my contact details, if you ever want to reach out, so it's sylvain@whispli.com, or you can also reach out directly from our website at whispli.com.
Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.